I want to show you some stuff.
Yay!
So a little while ago, I wrote a library called Newbie. It's a toolkit for building null object classes in Ruby. Now don't worry. This is not one of those talks where I show you a library that I just wrote the other day and I tell you all to go use it in your production apps. It's not one of those talks. I just want to share some of the fun parts of building this library, some of the things that made me happy. So, quick groundwork. Who here does not know what a null object is? A couple of people. For the benefit of those who aren't familiar with the null object pattern, here's a really, really quick introduction. Here's a method which does a lot of logging. And it may or may not have a logger, depending on whether somebody passes one in. And so it keeps checking to see if that logger is present before it can use it. Here is a null object implementation of a logger interface. So here's an object which will respond to any of the usual logger methods, but it'll do nothing. It'll just do nothing with them. We can take that and we can apply it to this method, and we can make that null logger the default rather than a nil. And when we do that, it enables us to get away from all that checking to see if the logger is there, because they can just confidently call those logger methods, and either it'll be a real logger or it'll be a null logger. Either way, it's not going to blow up. So a null object is basically it's just a way to simplify certain kinds of code. As you've just seen, clearly we do not need a library for building null objects, because we just built one. So why build one? Well, one reason is I wanted to make easy things easier. This is the equivalent not code for building that same null class. We just say not.build, and we say config.mimic logger, and it's going to mimic that logger interface, and it's going to return nil from all those methods that do nothing. So a little bit simpler, a little bit shorter. The other reason I wanted to do this is it turns out there are a number of interesting little variations on the null object pattern. So this top block is one such variation. Here is a black hole I/O object. It mimics an I/O, but beyond that, it's also a black hole, which means that it will return itself from any method that is called on it. And that means that we can chain methods infinitely, which means that we can do things like chaining the shuttle operator, which is nice to have if you're doing I/O. The second example here is another variation on a null object. Here's a traceable null object. This null object knows on what file and line it was born. And this is handy if you are debugging and trying to figure out why you have a null object when you expected not to have one. Now, I would like to tell you that in implementing not, I had a solid business case. You know, I had an application that I needed null objects all over the place, and I extracted this code out, but that would be a lie. I have a confession to make, kind of a dirty little secret. The truth is, I just love metaprogramming. I think it's fun. Different programmers find different things fun. Katrina talks about therapeutic refactoring just for the sheer pleasure of it. Some programmers enjoy code golf, reducing a program to the smallest possible number of characters. This, believe it or not, is a to-do list application in 140 characters. I metaprogram for fun. And if you're gonna metaprogram for fun, Ruby is a pretty cool language to do it in. After all, it is a language that was created to increase developer happiness. And it's got some nice features for metaprogramming. Of course, you can metaprogram in lots of languages. In C and C++, you did it with preprocessor macros or with template metaprogramming. C# and Java have elaborate reflection APIs. And then, of course, Lisp is legendary for the kind of metaprogramming you can do with macros. But of course, the trade-off that you make for that, the bargain you make, is that you have to write your code in the form of the AST that those macros manipulating. But the commonality among all of these, I think, is that for each language, there's kind of two levels. There is the code level, and then there's the meta level. And metaprogramming in Ruby is a little bit different, because in Ruby, you can take an array, and you can ask it how big it is, and it'll tell you, and that's the ordinary program. And then you can ask it what other messages you could send to it, the same way you asked it how big it was. And that's really metaprogramming. That's a meta message. And then you could ask, and then the thing that responds with is an array, and you can ask that array what size it is, and so on and so forth. The point is, it's all kind of mixed together. There aren't these separate levels of regular programming and metaprogramming. And so I feel like Ruby has kind of a punk rock metaprogramming ethos. When Ruby decides to sew a new patch on its jeans, it just sits down and sews the patch on while it's still wearing the jeans. And sometimes it sews the jeans to its leg, but mostly it works out. The thing is, though, this makes metaprogramming in Ruby really accessible. And I think that's probably a big part of why I enjoy it so much. Anyway, back to the code. So obviously, this toolkit for generating null object classes is going to be heavily concerned with generating classes. So how do we generate classes in Ruby? Well, when we want to generate a new object, we send the new message to the object class. When we want to generate a new class, we send the new message to the class. Again, no two different levels. You're not entering another language here. It's all the same. And I love the parity here. And then if we want to specify that we derive from a particular base class, we can pass in that base class as an argument. Now, when we generate classes in this fashion, they come out anonymous. They come out kind of ugly. They don't have a name. They just have a number. But the first time we assign one to a constant, it takes on the name of that constant. And from then on, it knows its own name. And this is a little bit surprising at first, but it's very, very convenient. So this is the first part of generating a null class. It's going to be just class.new, and we're going to pass in our base classes. We're going to base these on basic objects. Now, it seems like a good default behavior for a null object would be that it would respond to any message with nil, and it would do nothing. And it should also, if you ask it, it should report that it will respond to any message. So how do we do that? Well, it turns out to be incredibly simple. First of all, we implement method missing to respond to any missing message. And if you're not familiar with the syntax here, where it's just the lone asterisk, that's saying take any arguments and do nothing with them, ignore them all. I have seen that called the naked splat, but it occurred to me this morning that this could also be called the lone star. Now, and then to complement this, we also implement respond to. Again, takes any arguments and then just responds true to everything. And that's it. That is like the core of our null object class generation right there. Just a few lines of code, incredibly simple. Piece of cake. This stuff makes me happy. And I've been thinking about happiness and joy lately. I've been thinking about what sort of things bring me joy. When I think about that, one of the first things that come to mind, one of the things that has brought me joy throughout my life is music. Has anyone seen the movie Garden State? This is one of my favorite movies. And there's this scene in that movie that has always stuck with me. Relatively early in the film, Natalie Portman's character meets Zach Braff's character in a doctor's office waiting room. And she's listening to music on this great big pair of headphones. And she says, "You gotta hear this one song. It'll change your life, I swear." And she gives him the headphones. And this statement, the reason the scene sticks with me is that this statement just sums up the way I've felt so many times about a piece of music, and the joy that has brought me. I think about this and I think, has a piece of code ever brought me that kind of joy? Can code change your life? As I thought about this further, I realized, Ruby changed my life. See, I used to work at a big faceless corporation. I wrote a lot of C++. I even wrote some Visual Basic, and I lived in a cubicle, and I filled out my share of TPS reports. And then I learned Ruby, and it was fun. But there was more to it than that. I got involved in the Ruby community, and I met people who were organizing meetups just for fun. I met people who were organizing conferences just for fun. People who were optimizing their lives for happiness. And people who were optimizing their jobs for happiness. And from there, that has led me down this long road to this moment now, where I am a much, much happier hacker today than I was then because of Ruby. Anyway, back to the code. So far, we've been building these null classes on basic object, but I realized I really wanted to enable users of this library to vary the base class. Maybe they want it to be based on object instead of basic object. Another feature that I really wanted to support is something called impersonation. The idea of impersonation is that sometimes you'll have a piece of legacy code that has a lot of hard-coded type checks in it. And if you want to introduce a null object to that code, for it to be able to successfully pass through those hard-coded type checks without you going through and changing a whole lot of code, it's going to have to actually be the class that those checks are expecting. It's going to have to actually inherit from that class. And so I wanted to provide the possibility of actually inheriting this null object from some arbitrary class using impersonation. Well, this throws a wrench in the works, because so far in that build block, I've been performing these actions on a class that's under construction. Like mimic, it says define these methods on the class that's under construction. Well, how can I do that if I'm not even sure yet what the base class is going to be? I can't have a class under construction if I don't know the base class yet. So I've got a chicken and an egg problem. What do? Well, I realized that I was going to have to start queuing up some deferred operations until later. So that sounds like a pretty big re-architecture. Let's see what that entails. First of all, I need a queue of operations. Well, array works. Then I needed to arrange so that once the null class was finally generated, all of those deferred operations would be performed. And that was a simple matter of iterating through the operations and calling each operation on with that null class as an argument. And finally, I defined a little helper for deferring operations called defer. It takes a block, it turns that block into a proc implicitly, and it stuffs it into that queue of deferred operations. So let's see how this applies to mimicking in class, that feature that we've looked at a little bit already. So the idea of mimicking, we can say config.mimic, give it a class that it's going to mimic like logger. Here's the code for that before I introduce deferred operations. Pretty straightforward. It does a module eval on the class that's being defined. It goes over each of the instance methods of the class to mimic, and it defines a stub version. Here's the code after I introduce deferred operations. And really the only significant change here is that part of that logic got moved into a defer line. And this says exactly what I want to say. It says defer this part of the operation to later. All the rest stays the same, but defer this part of the operation to later. I love this. It's clean. It adapts the language to exactly what I wanted to say. And I got a major change in behavior from a relatively minor change to the code. Back to Garden State. One of the reasons that this scene sticks with me is because I think it says something really profound about the practice of joy. Because there are a couple of things going on here. I mean, first of all, you can see Corbin's character really loves this music. But it goes beyond that, because she loves this music so much that she feels compelled to share it with someone else. And I think this is a fundamental truth about joy. I think that we complete our joy when we share it with someone else. I think that is the moment that brings that to its full fruition. This is why I'm sharing this code with you today. One of the best ways that we have as programmers sharing with each other is practice of pair programming. Two programmers sit down in front of the keyboard, maybe right next to each other, maybe remotely, and they work on the same problem together. I've got some experience in pair programming. Particularly last year, I spent a big chunk of time doing nothing but pair programming. I paired with dozens and dozens of different people from all over the world, all different skill levels, spent hundreds and hundreds of hours doing this. And this process brought me, this experience brought me immeasurable amounts of joy. It also gave me kind of a unique perspective. Now, I know what it was like to come to the Ruby community 10 years ago, but these pairing sessions gave me the opportunity, gave me the privilege of finding out from the newbies that I paired with what it's like to come to the Ruby community today. And over again, I heard the same things. I heard them tell me how welcoming and how warm and how helpful and how kind and how excited the Ruby community was to them. Friends, we have some drama sometimes. We have some community fatigue sometimes. But make no mistake, we still have the finest community in this industry. And you all are part of that. So this experience of pairing was wonderful, and I wanted more people to have that experience, and so I've been on kind of a personal campaign to bring it to more people, to get more people to pair with each other more widely, more diversely, more often, outside of maybe, even if you're pairing, even if you're already doing pair programming at your job, maybe pair with somebody you've never paired with before. And so I've been asking people to put this Pair With Me badge up on their blogs and their websites, or use the Pair With Me hashtag. And with the help of the community, I've also put together a website, Pair Program With Me, that has some resources for getting started with remote pair programming. And the results of this have been really great. I've been really pleased to see where this is going. Here are just some random things that people have said about this. Being re-energized in my quest to be a Ruby dev. I might be hooked on remote pairing. This Pair With Me thing is really deepening the sense of community I feel. And the cool thing is that these days there is no excuse left not to go pair with someone. Even if you are a solo developer, even if you are in the middle of nowhere, if you have an internet connection, you have the ability to spend some time pairing with another programmer somewhere. It's fantastic. Anyway, back to the code. So, interface subsetting, there's a fancy term for you. What is interface subsetting? Well, back to mimic, talking about this a lot. Let's say we want to mimic a logger. That means we want to stub out methods like .info, but we don't necessarily want to stub out core methods that are on every object, like .object_id. So we really want to stub out an interface subset. So the first thing that might spring to mind when trying to come up with this interface subset is, well, what about if you call instance methods with a false argument, like I was talking about earlier in the rogue session, then you get just the instance methods that are defined on that class, none of its superclasses. But unfortunately, this doesn't really hold up because let's say we have a class called myLogger, and it just derives from logger and it adds one more method. And really, I think what we want here when we mimic myLogger is we want to mimic all of the methods on logger plus that one new method. But this is just going to give us that one method. So this is not a sufficient interface subset. So we need to solve this a different way. Here are the building blocks we're going to use to solve it. First of all, the fact that you can call instance method on a class, and it will return an array of symbols representing all the instance methods. Secondly, the fact that in Ruby, arrays have set operations defined on them. So you can take two arrays, and you can get their intersection, you can get their union, and you can subtract one set from another. So we put these two together, and we say, give me a list of methods, which is the methods defined on that class to mimic, minus the methods defined on object. And then we step through each of those methods, and we define a stub version of each. That's all there is to it. So interface subsetting turns out to be not as scary as it sounded, but make no mistake here, this is a pretty advanced operation. It's just really simple because of the way we can put these building blocks that Ruby gives us together. Love this stuff. So, I'm going to talk about pairing a little bit more. I've been banging the pairing drum for a little while now, and here's something that I've heard a number of times. People feel intimidated by the idea of going and pairing with somebody else because they feel like I'm no expert. What value could I bring to a pair programming session with some stranger? But the truth is you don't need to be an expert. Recently I asked some people, what was the latest Ruby wow moment that you had? You know, and I got a bunch of answers, and of course I got at least one answer that just left me scratching my head. But I also got answers like this. Being able to reopen an object or class. How many people in this room know you can do this and could show it to somebody else? There you go, you have everything you need to blow someone's mind. Okay, but maybe you are a total newbie. You just started learning Ruby this weekend. Maybe you just started learning programming. What could you possibly bring to the table? Well, I have an answer for that, but I'm going to answer it a little bit roundabout, in a little bit of a roundabout fashion. I have kids. Who here has kids? All right. If you have kids, you know that one of the pleasures of raising them is that you get to rediscover the world through their eyes. Here are two of my children discovering track maintenance equipment. Now, if you don't have kids, you may not realize that by combining a tractor with a train, track maintenance equipment is basically the most mind-blowing thing in the world. And I get to share these moments with them. It's fantastic. Back to that scene from Garden State. Between these two characters, Brad's character, Portman's character, who do you think has the better deal here? My money is on Portman's character because, sure, Zach Braff is getting to listen to the Shins, and that's nice, but Portman is getting to share something that is special to her with somebody new for the very first time. And that is a precious experience. When I've paired up with newbie programmers, I got to experience those wow moments over and over again. I learned things about what I knew, things that I didn't realize that I knew because they were just sort of implicit. I learned things about what I didn't know and needed to learn more about. And I learned how to put the ideas in my head into words. So, if you are a newbie, if you are a beginner, and you take nothing else away from this talk, I hope that you'll take this away. When you bring your beginner's mind to that pairing table, you give your pairing partner a profound, a precious gift. Don't forget that. Anyway, back to the code. So I have all these operations that can be performed on a null class as it is being constructed. And I kept them all in a class called null class builder, and there was a method for each one of these operations. And it started to get big as I added more features to it. As a matter of fact, it started to get over 200 lines long. And so it felt like it was time to start moving some of this functionality out, start doing a little refactoring. And I thought it might make sense to do one of the classic refactoring, sprout off a command object. So rather than having a method for mimic, we have a class called mimic, which is inside a command namespace. And its initializer takes all the usual arguments to the mimic method, and then it has a call, which has the actual logic of mimicking inside it. And then back in the null class builder, all we have to leave behind is this sort of stub, just one line where we instantiate the command and feed it all the arguments and then call it. And this is nice, but it's still a little tedious. I have to put one of these stubs in for every new feature that I add. And so I thought, well, you know, we're having fun with metaprogramming already. Wouldn't it be cool if we could just dynamically discover these commands? So I set about doing that. First of all, I wrote myself, with the help of the internet, I wrote myself a little helper just to convert command method names into command names. And if you were in on Nell's session earlier, now you know what that was all about. And I defined method missing on the null class builder. And this method missing basically just looks in a command's namespace, looks to see if it can find a command that matches that method name, and if so, it instantiates it and calls it. And of course, since I'm a polite metaprogrammer, I also define responds to missing to use the same logic. And now, as a client programmer, you can use these commands, and some of them may be defined as command objects, and some of them may be defined as methods right on the null class builder, but you don't know and you don't care. It's completely transparent to you. But that's not all. Because these commands are dynamically discovered within a command's namespace, anybody else who defines a command within that namespace, though that command is now available within that not build block. So I basically gave myself plugins for free. How cool is that? Let's draw this to a close. First of all, what I want to leave you with is that metaprogramming is awesome. At least I think so. Secondly, I really want to encourage you to take time to embrace joyful coding. Embrace coding for the fun of it. Make sure that at least some of the time you spend every week is doing some kind of coding, whether you enjoy refactoring, whether you enjoy golfing, whether you enjoy performance optimization, whether it is responsible coding or irresponsible coding. This stuff is important. This stuff stretches your mind. The fun coding stretches your mind, as Steve was telling us. And you know, if you show me a developer who is not writing some fun code, having some fun writing code every week, and I will show you a developer who's not working at her peak effectiveness. So this stuff is important. I also want to encourage you to retain your joy. This has been a fantastic conference. Am I right? This is an amazing conference. And you are going to go home from here feeling energized and feeling excited. You're going to want to try new things. But that feeling is going to fade. And you might not be going to another conference like this for another 6 months or another year. I know a way to bring back that feeling over and over again, and I know it because time and again I have looked at my calendar and said, oh God, I've got a pairing session scheduled. I just want to go watch TV. And then halfway into that pairing session with some person I've never worked with before, I am excited, I am energized, I'm enjoying what I'm doing, I'm making notes about projects that I want to try, that working on this new project that they brought in has given me ideas for, or I'm making notes for new Ruby Tapas episodes. I'm getting that same charge of excitement and energy that I get coming home from a conference. And every single time when I was done, I was glad that I had that pair programming session. So, the most important thing I want to leave you with is I just want to encourage you to share your joy. To help you do that, I have been passing around a little tin of pairing cards. Hopefully it's been around the room all the way. I don't know if there's enough for everyone, but they've got a URL on them and a code on them, and you can take those home and you can punch them in, and you will be hooked up with somebody else to pair with. So now you don't have the excuse that you don't know who to pair with. I actually gave out a bunch of those at the Ruby Nation conference a month ago, so you might be pairing with someone from DC. So yeah, I just wanted to make that step a little bit easier for you. Hopefully you got one. Just when you go out from here, I hope that you will make an effort to share your coding joy with somebody else. You never know, it might just change their life. Thank you very much. Happy hacking.